Go back to the Bible, you find what has been will be again. What has been done will be done again. There's nothing new under the sun. We think that we have the leading edge in technology. We are the apex of the world's civilizations, but I don't think this is true. More and more, despite the foot dragging and naysaying by archaeologists and historians and everything else, we are more and more coming to learn that apparently at one point there was a planet-wide, highly technical civilization on this planet. And something happened, war and or geophysical changes, or both. And what we think of as our history, beginning with the Sumerians, coming up to the Egyptians, Babylonians, and now up to the Greeks, Romans, Western civilization, of course, is what we're primarily talking about. That is nothing but the remnants of an earlier prehistoric civilization. The evidence is everywhere. The round balls of Guatemala, the pyramids all over the world, in China, in South America, Central America, Egypt.
Evidence of real things that went on way back. We know that the technology to build the monuments in Egypt was far in advance of anything that the Egyptian government or the Antiquities Bureau will admit to.
Oh, heavens, yes. And I've been to Egypt 3 times. I've been through the pyramid, and especially the Great Pyramid of Giza. It's just ludicrous on the face of it to imply that humans built that. I mean, it is quite literally foolish in polite company to talk about humans building that pyramid.
Right.
Because when you go inside the thing and see those stones which are used, and some of them, I'm just guessing because it's been years since I've been there, but maybe 20, 25 feet long, 8 foot square, 12 to 1,300 tons a piece, and they're all up and down the Grand Gallery and across the ceiling, 12 to 1,400 tons a piece. And they're all up and down the Grand Gallery. And
a bunch of guys with block and tackle lifted them up.
Yeah, of course, that's all it was. Just got a bunch of slaves in there with a whip.
Bronze Age chisels and mallets. Yeah.
Incredible. And probably that's another thing. The one thing that really shocked me when I was in Egypt is to see in the temples, everywhere you go, the stones in the temples are flawlessly true, squared, and the surface is like a mirror surface. You're looking at these stones, and you can see your reflection like in a mirror because it's absolutely flawlessly true and smooth as silk. You run your hand over it, and it's like a mirror. You're running your hand over a pane of glass. It's so flawlessly true. And so you can rub it clean and then the dust off, and you can see your face in it. That's how mirror surface these stones are. You don't get that with a chisel, and I don't know how you do it, but you don't get it with a chisel and a bunch of slaves out there banging away on chisels. And so anyone who's really studied the pyramid, and especially the Great Pyramid, knows that there's a big story here that's never been told.
So the whole history of Egypt is based on a false premise. And the Egyptologists either won't acknowledge that or don't acknowledge it. And there's a very strong reason why. They've all gone to university for all of this time to get professorships, all based on that. So for somebody to come out and contradict it means destroying the whole basis of that very science, if you want to call it a science. So that they will not accept anyone who is not an Egyptologist because they're not experienced, they're not qualified to do that. So that's why the documentation of Egypt is wrong. The next thing about Egypt is the physical evidence. So anyone who looks at the physical evidence will tell you that that couldn't have possibly been built by humans. There's no way known that that could have been happened. How do you move 2.3 million blocks that weigh anything from 2 to 10 tons? And they've done a check on it and said, well, if they had all the population of Egypt working 7 days a week, 10 hours a day during the day, it would take them 20 years to build that. But the Egyptologists will tell you, oh no, but they didn't work 12 months of the year because they were actually having to do farming for 9 months of the year, so they only worked 3 months of the year. So suddenly when you start to work out how often they're having to put one of these 2 to 10 ton blocks in place, they were having to put them in one every 2 seconds. One every 2 seconds. It's crazy. This is what the Egyptologists will tell you. When you start to pull apart the story and you do the time frames, it just doesn't make sense. But they strictly adhere to that. And they say that they moved these massive things on logs. Well, there's no trees in Egypt, it's a desert. So where do they get all the logs from? Oh, they shipped them in from Europe. Millions of logs that they shipped in from Europe. Well, are there any logs left over? Oh no, because they burnt them all. Okay, what? They weren't planning on building any more pyramids and keeping them lying around? No, there's so many things. It's they get the dog chasing its tail, try to cover up the stuff that doesn't lie. So the evidence is compelling that there was some sort of civilization going there, and in fact going back hundreds of thousands of years. There were all of these temples made of polished red granite. We don't have the technology to be able to cut 10-ton blocks of red granite and polish them to the accuracy that they have. We just don't have the technology to build these temples. So someone who had a great technology did, and it was way before we came on the scene.
The idea that far back in the ancient world there were just primitive people is utterly, utterly ludicrous. But if you establish and you reveal publicly in mainstream that they weren't just primitive people, and in fact there was some very, very advanced technological knowledge back there, then the whole house of cards of conventional history starts to fall. You don't want that. As George Orwell said in his book 1984, words to the effect, he who controls history controls the present, and he who controls the present controls history. In other words, if you control the writing of history, you can give people a false fix of where they've come from, therefore giving them a false fix of where they are. That's why the rewriting of history has been so important, and that's why the destruction of historical accounts all over the world has been, and the destruction of them has actually been so important. So I started to go back, and when you realize that back in the ancient world was phenomenal knowledge as well as no knowledge, suddenly some questions start to be answered, some mysteries. And the mysteries are very important, you know. It's great mysteries, because if something comes to light that demolishes your version of life or history, and you say, well, if that's true, mate, what about that? You go, it's a mystery. It's lovely. I just keep it. It's a mystery. Oh, it's a mystery. And you leave it there, because then you can concentrate with your vision of life. And so one of the things that I hear from the academics is that there was just these primitive people in the ancient world. The question, therefore, is, who built these buggers then? Simple question. What the academics say, you'll say, because, you know, we academics also. We academics of universities like Cambridge and Oxford and British Columbia, you know, we're very, very clever, you know, very bright indeed, very bright. And we've had a discussion, you'll see, and we've come to the conclusion, you'll see, that these pyramids were built like this, you'll see. These pyramid things, you'll see. What they did, you'll see, is they built these ramps, you'll see. I'm not kidding. They built these ramps, you'll see. I know they had to use as much stone to build the ramps as they did the pyramids, but we don't go into that because it gets a bit complicated. They built these ramps, you'll see, and then they pushed their stones, their little stones, yes, 270 tons, some of them, quite right, up their ramps, you'll see, and they built their pyramids. Very clever, but very primitive, really. There is enough stone staring at you to build 30 Empire State Buildings. There is enough stone to build a wall around the entire perimeter of France, which is a friggin' big country. There's enough, or the stone in the Great Pyramid weighs around 6.5 million tons. The idea that primitive people built that is off the flippin' planet. This is Peru, right? 440 tons this sodding thing is. I mean, Bill and Fred down the builder's yard have moved that in, haven't they? Oh, come on, Fred, bit more, bit more, bit more. 440 tons. And when you look at the way that these ancient structures all over the world, and interestingly, the older the structure, the more amazing it is. Obviously, some knowledge was lost the nearer we got to the modern world. I mean, I've only seen some of these documentaries recently, which is not exposing the manipulation, but just looking and asking the question, who the hell built these things? But they've shown that this phenomenal workmanship and the techniques are found all over the world. There was some kind of global knowledge way back in the ancient world. I mean, you know, Fred and Bill have hit this with an hammer, haven't they? Look at it. I mean, it's just magnificent. That's just one stone. This is a place called Baalbek in the Lebanon. To build this, they had to put 3 chunks of stone, they're called the trilithon, each of which weigh 800 tons in this structure, and this one's 20 foot high up in a wall. There's another one that's 1,000 tons, which, so I read, is about 3 jumbo jets. Primitive people did this. When you keep going through, this is, if it bloody changes. Someone sent me this. This is from a temple in Egypt, an ancient piece of artwork. And what you've got are the ancient Egyptians lining up here to give a gift and offering, sheep and stuff, to their god. And when you get to the end of the line and you see what the god looks like, well, it's kind of very strange. It's not what you think the god would look like. And when I started scanning around, there's not that many absolutely literal depictions of reptilian figures, reptilian gods, but there are some. What Credo Mutwa told me is that the Chitahuri, which incidentally in Black African translates as the children of the serpent, the children of the python, which is what they call these bloodlines, he said because they were reptilian, they said, as I said earlier, never depict us as we really look. So the symbolism of the snake, the symbolism of the serpent became depictions of the gods. But you can find some.
What's the proof of that? Is there any proof that any ancient advanced civilization was ever on Earth at any point in the dim or distant past? Yes, yes. The megalithic structures out there, the pyramids, Tiwanaku, Baalbek, Teotihuacan, Stonehenge, you name it, a couple of dozen of them. All of those are impossible for human beings to recreate today. And yet we are told in another one of these great fantasies that they were somehow created by people in ancient times, ancient Egyptians or ancient Sumerians or anybody. Somehow or other they did it. And it's just absolute malarkey. Impossible. Now, next slide. Some Egyptian scholars tried to prove it by getting down in with some pink granite here and wailing away with some stones for a few hours and tore their hands up and walked out of there saying, well, you know, we couldn't make much of a dent in it, but boy, you know, those old folks, they sure had a lot of time on their hands, and somehow they figured out a way to do it. Wouldn't give an inch after this. Wouldn't give an inch. It's ridiculous. Now, here's the stone they're working on. Next slide. Some of you may have seen this. This is an ancient 1,170-ton obelisk lies unfinished at the Aswan quarry. A crack rendered the stone unusable. It's pink granite. They were making it into an obelisk like the one you saw in Allen's slides. Okay? It's about 100 feet long. It's about 12 feet wide, 12 feet deep on the side. Imagine the Washington Monument, just squared off. And it's pretty much done. But now let's move this from the Stone Age. Let's move it through the age of copper, because copper wouldn't make a dent in that. And let's move it into the Bronze Age. Bronze will chip on it. Bronze will take a little bit of it out. Now, let's put our bronze chisels or hatchets or whatever in the hands of some guys and get them down in this crack and put them to work. How do you think they're going to fare in there? Pretty tight fit. Plastic Man might have a tough time up in there. But the point is, they've got it pretty much done. They're working on the spire here. When they break it, you know how it works. You press here, you get this. Well, look, does this look like somebody chipping away with a little hand? No. This looks like a belt sander taking pieces out the size of the chair you're sitting on. Huge chunks of pink granite, one of the hardest stones in the world, just being ripped out. And they press too hard with whatever machine they've got here, and you know your physics. You get stress back here, and they popped it. They broke it. And they just said, whoops, we busted that one. And they just unhooked it and went somewhere else and left it for us to marvel at and wonder how they could have done it. But now let's go ahead and say they didn't bust it and they finished it. These primitive people now who managed somehow to do this. They finished it, it's ready to go. The hole, by the way, is about 15 feet deep. That's the top of it up there. But still, what's the first thing they've got to do? Somebody's got to draw straws to get down there with his hatchet and cut it loose from the bottom. Now, who's going to do that with 1,100 tons sitting on top of him? We could not get our best diamond-tipped blades to cut through underneath this thing. The weight would stop the blade. We could not, the operative word here is impossible. We could not get this out of here. And yet they did it time and time and time again. To lift it out, just if we could somehow cut it loose, we would have to take a dozen of our largest movable cranes to wring that hole just to get it up. You're being lied to, folks. That's the main thing you got to understand. You're being lied to.